The Sacramento Kings fired their head coach. That means Willie Green should be next, right? Maybe not. In today's Locked On Pelicans, we'll look at the parallels between the two situations, but also why they're very different and where the team stands exactly on Willie Green. It's the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Monday, and we are going to look at Willie Green, the Sacramento Kings firing their head coach, Mike Brown. So Willie Green should be next, right? Because there are a lot of similarities there. We'll get into that. We'll get into the differences, when maybe a decision will get made, where the team stands on this in general. There's a lot to really dive into, including ownership and comparing and contrasting ownership with the Pelicans and the Kings as well. So let's get into it in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. We were here all last week during the holiday week, planning on being here all week as well. We got a lot of things to talk about. So let's dive into it here. The Sacramento Kings over the weekend fired Mike Brown, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I thought about doing like an emergency show on Saturday or Sunday looking at this, but I felt it was appropriate to do for today's show, and given that the game they played over the weekend, there wasn't really a whole lot to talk about. We'll get into the larger topics, Trey Murphy and Yves Missi and some of the other things later in the week. It seems appropriate to talk about here, because when you look at Mike Brown being fired by the Kings, there are a lot of similarities. So if he was fired, then the Pelicans should make the same decision as they did, right? Not so fast, but also maybe they should. You know, the Sacramento Kings just wrapped up a 5-game homestand where they went 0-5. The Pelicans right now are on a 5-game homestand. They've lost 4 of them. They play tonight against the Clippers, where they might lose their 5th. They're on a current 9-game losing streak, might be a 10-game losing streak by tonight. We'll recap tonight's game in tomorrow's show. So that alone seems to do it, right? When you look at their head coach just not getting the most out of his players, at times it looked like the guys quit on the team. There definitely seems to be some friction there between Mike Brown and some of the players. So if they're going to fire him, who has a better record than Willie Green does and is arguably their best head coach that they've had in 20 years, shouldn't the Pelicans do the same thing? Because one of the things we've seen from the Pelicans, despite all the injuries, and we'll get into the injuries in a second here, you know, they should be playing better than they should. Maybe they're not going to win all of these games. Maybe they're not going to win one game, but they should be more competitive. It shouldn't be double-digit blowout losses like is happening to them right now. And when you look at that with the Sacramento Kings, a lot of it is that, like, it was pretty ugly in some 3 of those 5 games. They lost 122-95 to Indiana. They lost to the Lakers by 13. Some of them were close, certainly, but some weren't so close. And so that's not really a great thing. Their first game after firing Mike Brown, playing the Lakers on the road that time, they lost by 10. So you look at them, and they're in a similar-ish boat to New Orleans. They had playoff aspirations, but right now they're 13-19, and they looked like they weren't figuring things out. They were losing lots of games in the clutch. I did Locked On NBA on Friday, and we recapped their loss to the Pistons, which was absolutely horrific, with De'Aaron Fox fouling Jaden Ivey at the buzzer. He makes the 3, and then because it was a foul with the and 1, he goes to the free throw line, makes the free throw, and they lose by 1 when they were up 3. They were up 19 in that game too, and they blew that. But when you look at it, other than the losing, I think that's kind of where the similarities end. And look, the losing can be enough. This team is very justified if they want to fire Willie Green today, tomorrow, whenever, yesterday, right? Last week. But when you look at the Sacramento Kings, and I urge you to go listen to the Locked On Kings podcast about this, I don't know if Mike Brown was actually at fault there. And their host, Matt George, is a good friend of mine, really tore into the organization in a way that I'm not going to do here because I don't think the organizations are that similar. More on that in the third segment, and I'll explain why. Look, Willie Green is not blameless in this whatsoever. He's not blameless at all. He carries a lot of blame for the way this season is going and for the issues that we've seen repeatedly for this team. The lack of innovation on offense, the lack of maybe holding guys accountable, things like that. Not developing some of the young players that they should be developing. As I said, they're very justified in firing Willie Green. We even did this show last week on why you should probably do it. But is Willie Green the first guy who should be taking the fall for the way this season has gone, or even this era has gone for New Orleans? You can argue it. I'd listen to you and I'd probably agree with you, but you can also argue that it should be the front office. You could also argue the reason none of this is working is the injuries to the team. Look, we were all really high on this team going into the season. Don't pretend like you weren't. Even if you had some concerns about them, you like the team. On paper, it's the most talented team that they have put together. 49 wins last year wasn't by accident. Even if it didn't feel like the team was reaching its ceiling, they never felt like greater than the sum of their parts, right? I even said that. Like last year, to me, was a disappointing year despite 49 wins because they never put it all together despite being very healthy. A lot of that, even the majority of that, might be on the head coach. But Mike Brown was, this is a quote from the Locked On Kings podcast. Mike Brown was fired because the GM didn't do his job. Mike Brown was fired because the star player, De'Aaron Fox, blew it in that loss to the Pistons. And I see similarities to that here. Now, I'm not trying to actively defend Willie Green. Part of this is playing devil's advocate and just trying to get you to think a little bit rather than just, wanting to go stand behind the bench and just yell at Willie Green while you're drunk all game. So, because that doesn't do anything. And if Brown was fired because the GM didn't do the job or because the star players didn't live up to it, look, that sounds similar to New Orleans, right? Is this team bad because of Willie Green, or are they bad because they don't have Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson? Are they bad because those guys haven't lived up to what they should be in their time here? Zion more so than Ingram, in my opinion. I think that's probably the case. All of that said, the first move is always to fire the head coach. They know this going in. The first move is always to fire the head coach. I've explained this to, the everydayers know this one. If you kind of look at like a triage of steps of like, what do you do to kind of turn around a bad season? The first move is almost always going to be firing the head coach. You can't turn around the roster really quickly. You can't flip Zion and or Ingram and get a competitive team out there on the court right away. You're not going to be able to do that. So if you want to kind of change the way things are, you fire the head coach. Even firing David Griffin in the front office right now and bringing someone new in isn't going to change anything right away. So we'll get into that next about when you can do that maybe in the off season and why maybe they're waiting for that sort of decision. So it's always going to be the head coach. I don't think it would be scapegoating things here, though it's worth noting, we'll talk more about this in the third segment, that people are coming out of the woodwork to bash the Kings, and honestly, probably rightfully so. And I don't think the Pelicans are in a similar boat in terms of like the way the franchises are operated. So it's always going to be the head coach. So Mike Brown getting fired with a disappointing season with a team that cannot win in the clutch, very similar to New Orleans here too. Yeah, that makes tons of sense to me. Same reason why the Milwaukee Bucks fired Adrian Griffin last year, even though they had a winning record. It's whenever you've seen something like this, it's always going to be the head coach. They know this going in. It's why they get paid a bunch of money. And it's why a guy like Mike Brown rightfully negotiated a contract extension and played very big time hardball with the Sacramento Kings, which also probably left a bit of a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to that. So the first move is always the head coach. So even if it's not Willie Green's full fault, even if he doesn't have that much blame, let's say, and he has more than just like a little bit of blame, in my opinion, it's always going to be the head coach. And that's what you do. Just to kind of change the vibe around the team. I talked to Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. Saints went through a head coaching change in the middle of the season. They were never going to keep Dennis Allen next year. So do you really need to fire him right now? Why not just wait till the offseason? That one was a very different scenario, and I explained that last week on the show. You worried there that, the players hated Dennis Allen. The players don't hate Willie Green. And when you look at Willie Green's record here of Pelicans head coaches, it's better than most, right? There's only two coaches that have a 500 or better record with New Orleans. One is Tim Floyd at 41-44. The other is Paul Silas at 47-35. After that, it's Byron Scott. Look, bunch of playoffs, but he had a 48.4 winning percentage. Willie Green is 47.5. He's got a higher winning percentage by far than Monty Williams does. Think about that for a second. You could argue he's one of the more successful head coaches in franchise history, just like Mike Brown was for the Sacramento Kings. So there's something to be said for the job that he's done, even if his winning record, even if his record is under 500. But a lot of that has come without Zion, without Ingram. Worth keeping in mind. So coming up next, let's look at the roster and building around players and look at just kind of playing the hand that you're dealt, but also get into what the front office thinks about what not just the front office, but ownership thinks about Willie Green and when decisions might get made on this sort of thing. Why hasn't it happened yet? I know that's gnawing at you. We'll talk about why. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it that simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team, complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you could get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It only takes 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off. 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We're the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason here. Looking at everything here. We're not just going to scream and yell about Willie Green. I get it. I don't think he should be the head coach next year. I don't know if there's a point in firing him right now, but I also see the point in firing him right now. We just kind of want to discuss the options, look at this with a clear mind on the parallels between the two, between the Kings and the Pelicans, because I do think there are some, but also it does fall apart quicker than you think. So let's get into more about the Kings firing Mike Brown, the parallels to Willie Green, but I also want to look at what ownership thinks here. I'm gonna start with this. I'm gonna start with asking you this question. Do you trust the current front office to make the next coaching hire? Do you trust David Griffin and company to make the next coaching hire? There's no right or wrong answer to this, and I'm not giving an answer on what I think just yet. Do you trust them to make that decision? They inherited Alvin Gentry, moved on from him, hired Stan Van Gundy, fired him after a year, then hired Willie Green. Depends on what you think about Willie Green's tenure here. But do you trust them to make that decision? Hold that thought for a second here. So let's look at the roster and building around players. You know, sometimes in the NBA, you've just got to play the hand that you're dealt, right? We're going to use a bunch of cliches in this segment. You play the hand you're dealt, right? Sometimes you just can't do much about it. When David Griffin stepped in, they had to trade Anthony Davis. They got what we thought was a really good return. They got the #1 overall pick. You got a generational player, what you thought was going to be a generational cornerstone in Zion Williamson. Turns out he has not been that. He's not been that at all. And I'm a big Zion guy. Hasn't been that type of player. But what do you do, right? Did they hold on to this era, the Zion and Ingram era, too long? Just Ingram, just Zion? Maybe it kind of feels like it, right? It just feels like it's not going to work with the way they have things. Just look, Zion supposedly did all the right things and then the injuries still happened. And that's even worse, in my opinion, than if he didn't do the right things. He didn't do everything perfect this offseason, but he was pretty good, I think. Then if he didn't do everything wrong, because it's like, well, if your best case scenario is still this type of hamstring injury and missing a ton of time, well, then what, right? That's kind of the issue that we're seeing here. That's more concerning than if he was just being lazy and not trying. So, but it's who they had. And here's the thing. They seemingly tried to pivot. They looked at trading him and or Ingram last offseason, trying to get Scoot Henderson. We talked about it here. It was reported elsewhere. They'd thrown out trade feelers the year before that for Zion Williamson. That was reported by Mark Stein. They've tried, but it takes two to tango, right? You can't just force a trade to happen. This isn't NBA 2K. You've got to find someone who's willing to bite on it. And when Zion was still on his rookie deal and you're trying to kind of figure that out, or the beginning part of his extension, and they couldn't get an offer, you gotta kind of play the hand that you're dealt, and it's build around those guys. And it's unfortunate that it just hasn't worked out, but it seemingly was. Everyone was high on this team 2 years ago, even a year ago, going into this season. So sometimes you play the hand you're dealt, and it's just a losing hand no matter what you do. And maybe that's partially the case here. Is that Willie Green's fault? Is that David Griffin's fault? Is that Zion's fault? To me, it's more of Zion than anybody else. Now, the front office has definitely made mistakes, not just in terms of trades or lack thereof, or we can nitpick all that stuff, but even the way they handled maybe the relationship with Zion and other things like that too. Could that have changed his career trajectory? Yeah. But you're getting into big time hypotheticals that we don't really have an answer to when it comes to that. Doesn't mean that the front office should stay. Probably not, in my opinion, but I don't, if I were in their position, would I have done things differently? Maybe minor things, but building around Zion, building around Ingram is probably what I would have done. I think that's what most of us would have done. And I don't want to speak for you, but it feels that way. Because again, it's the hand that you're dealt. There's not much you can do about it, right? Like if Anthony Davis didn't want to stay, there's nothing you could do to make him stay, kind of at that point in time. So you play the hand that you're dealt. And it seems like they tried to pivot and just weren't able to pull it off, right? It goes back to what Matt George, host of Locked On Kings, said that we quoted in the beginning. Mike Brown was fired because the GM didn't do his job. Mike Brown was fired because the star player blew it the other night. Mike Brown was fired because he tried to hold his players accountable. There's a great article on The Athletic about this. Mike Brown was fired because he tried to hold his players accountable, and they didn't like those scathing press conferences. If you're a Sacramento Kings fan, put yourselves in their shoes. Do you want De'Aaron Fox gone? Do you want De'Aaron Fox gone? If the answer to that is no, you didn't like Mike Brown not throwing the players under the bus. I wouldn't say it was that, right? I think everything he said was kind of true. So it's not throwing the players under the bus. But him trying to hold those guys accountable basically is kind of like push De'Aaron Fox to want to trade. Say what you will about like the era of players and all of that, but you get the point that I'm trying to make. There's a reason why you don't hear Willie Green say some of that stuff, because he's trying to kind of keep the locker room together. And from what I understand from talking to people, talking to the players, talking to people around the team, it doesn't seem like the locker room's being lost here in New Orleans. It definitely was being lost in Sacramento. Keep that in mind when you hear Willie Green be like, give the other team credit. And even though I get sick of that too, and sometimes you do need to rip into your team, even publicly. Mike Brown was doing it a lot. Maybe that was too much, but 1-2 times can definitely be fine. There's a reason Willie Green is taking that approach that he is. There's at least a reason for it. Whether you agree with the reason or not, that's a different story. And that's totally fine. But there's at least some logic behind what he's doing there. And you can safely say, or at least I feel comfortable saying, they haven't lost the locker room here. Some frustrations, yeah, but that has more to do with losing. Last year, it's the same Willie Green, right? It's the same Willie Green, because that dude has not grown at all as a head coach this year. And they weren't losing the locker room back then either. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Sometimes it's mainly just losing. And that's what it looks like with the Sacramento Kings here a little bit. And that's not a great situation to be in. So going back to the question I asked in the beginning here, do you trust the front office to make the next coaching hire? If you're like, no, I don't, there's no need to fire Willie Green right now and even have that front office start doing any work on it. If you're ownership, and so that's Gail Benson and the people kind of in her inner orbit, right? And that's kind of how I refer to ownership. If you decide you don't know if you want to keep Willie Green or not, or want to keep the front office or not yet, no, just wait. What you do is you fire the front office, clean house there, bring in a new regime, and let them make a decision on Willie Green. Simple as that. They might like Willie Green as a coach. There's reasons to like him. There's reasons not to. And maybe you just want to bring in your own guy. But you let them make that determination. It was the same thing when Trajan Langdon went to Detroit to become their president of basketball operations. He was hired, and then it was up to him on what to do with Monty Williams, and he evaluated everything and decided to move on from Monty Williams. Monty was actively bad last year, but I think we'd all say he's probably a good coach. So you could have conceivably kept him, because that can be an important thing. Or not. Let the new regime make that decision. Maybe they want to keep Willie Green. Maybe they know this roster is not ready to compete for a title in the next year or two. Keep Willie Green as a caretaker, then move on from him when the team's ready to take another leap. And that way that front office is only making one hiring decision, not two. That looks a whole lot better. There's some optics and PR into this, which we'll get into in the next segment as well. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, that just because he hasn't been fired yet doesn't mean that they don't know that he's not doing a bad job, doesn't mean ownership doesn't care. It just might be you're waiting till the end of the season to kind of make the changes that you want to make, or you're still evaluating everything. There's a valid argument, in my opinion, to be made that this season's off the rails because of all of the injuries. Simple as that. They were going to be competitive. I don't know if they would have been title contenders, conference finalists, anything like that, had they been healthy. DeJounte Murray's not playing well at all right now. We've seen some issues in the clutch and other things too, and some coaching stuff. But if this team was fully healthy, they would have been better. We can all say they would have more than 5 wins. So there is an argument to be made, a strong argument too, that, yeah, it's just injuries. So run it back, not run it back, whatever. You get what I'm trying to say of it's not, there's just not much to do right now, right? Like this team, no matter what, is going to be bad, head coach or different. And if Willie Green's not losing the locker room, not kind of having players like poisoned against the organization, that is not happening, then I don't know if you need to make the change. You're valid to just to bring in some new energy because they shouldn't look this bad. There's the business side of it. They're going to have issues with ticket renewals. And I've talked to ticket reps and I've talked to people pretty high up in the organization about that too. They're well aware of it. And they're trying to figure out what to do, which I think is going to be lowering prices. And we'll do a whole show on like what they need to do for fans. By the way, that's a great thing to put down in the comments. Outside of firings and lowering prices, remove those from the equation here. What do you think the team needs to do outside of lowering prices and firing Willie Green and David Griffin and or trading guys away? What does the team need to do to kind of incentivize people to buy tickets? I'm kind of curious what you have to say. This is going to be a whole show, so it might get featured in there. So that's kind of where I think it stands right now. I think they know this is a struggle and it's not working, and I think they're just waiting to the offseason to make those final decisions. I don't think they feel the need to do it right now because of a reason that we're going to talk about next. Let's get into that. Like, why not now? And I think you saw it with what happened to the Kings, with people coming out of the woodwork to bash the team. That might be a reason you don't fire Willie Green just yet. Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans and kind of examine ownership compared to the Kings' ownership as well. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Sorry, 11,000. I'm not used to saying that. That's a real cool number. We're the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason. Trying to just lay out both sides of this. I'm not trying to influence your decision on what you think about Willie Green or not right now. And I know a lot of y'all come to me wanting my thoughts on it and my opinion on it. And I've given it in previous shows, but I want to let this one be you deciding, you tell me once you kind of hear one side and then the other. So once you've listened to the whole episode, try and make it that far if you can. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. This is me trying to kind of help you think about it. I mean, if you want that, maybe you don't, and that's fine too. I respect everyone's decision on what they think about this sort of thing. We all want the same thing here, which is this team to be competitive and to win games. Simple as that. So in this part here, I want to look at ownership and a reason why you maybe don't fire Willie Green during the season. I even said this last week before Mike Brown got fired, and I'm going to pat myself on the back on this one here because something I said in that show really came true after Mike Brown was fired. And that's the PR look of it, right? The Kings have long been thought of as a laughingstock around the league. The Kangs, right? That's what we call them. They're a joke. They have it. They had a near 20-year playoff drought, whatever it was. Mike Brown got them there. Arguably, they're one of the best coaches, their best coach in 20 years. They've gone through, this will be their 8th head coach under Ranadive as their owner. That's not a great look. And the way Mike Brown was fired, after running a practice, after talking to the media for nearly 20 minutes, and then on his way to the team plane, fired while he was in the car, it's horrible. And you saw but a lot of head coaches came out after that and blasted the organization. The Mike Malone, who was fired by the Kings in weird circumstances, blasted them in his pregame press conference. Rick Carlisle of the Indiana Pacers blasted that team in his pregame press conference. I think Ime Udoka did as well, and one or two others did as well. Like, everyone lit into the Kings. Go listen to Locked On Kings, and the headline is, Kings make their dumbest decision yet. No one thinks this was a good move because no one looks at that situation from the Kings. You probably don't think it was smart to fire Mike Brown, right? It's definitely De'Aaron Fox and the roster and other issues like that. They've lost a lot of their depth, and bringing in DeMar DeRozan wasn't the move, and we all knew that in the first place. He's a scapegoat. He's a fall guy. And while you follow this team closer than a lot of other national media does, if they fire Willie Green today, tomorrow, and maybe they still will, they're going to get ripped. They're going to get ripped. I think it'll be if they do, you won't hear me ripping them. I'll be like, this was the correct decision to do. But a lot of people are going to rip them, and they're going to go, well, Zion hasn't played nearly as many games as he should have, right? He's missed more games than he's played under Willie Green. So you're going to fire Willie Green over their star player, Zion, not living up to his contract, living up to his end of the bargain. Oh, okay, they couldn't put a competent roster about it. Look at the center position, all that, even though we like Messi now, and that's kind of a different story. They're going to get ripped nationally as just a joke of an organization. And truthfully, I don't think they're nearly in the same boat as the Sacramento Kings. But the PR optics will look bad. I don't think they want that. And also, if you're going to fire Willie Green, doing it before a 5-game homestand would be right when you also have 2-3 days in between some of your games. That is a lot of time for a new head coach to kind of get with his players and start to make some changes. And so if you weren't going to do it now, I just don't see them doing it, partially because of the PR optics are going to be bad, even if we all think it would be a fine and maybe correct move to do. But that's something that is worth keeping in mind. People came out of the woodwork to blast the Sacramento Kings. And Vivek Ranadive's name came up a lot. He comes off as a meddling owner because, frankly, he is a meddling owner. This is the same guy that wanted the Sacramento Kings to play 4-on-5 on defense so they could have one guy down at the other end trying to cherry pick. Like, he made that, coaching suggestion. I don't even know what the heck you would call it. Coaching suggestion to his coaches. Play 4-on-5 on defense and keep one guy just under the basket so they can get easy points. The dumbest freaking thing, right? This is also the same guy that wanted to trade, just loved Buddy Hield. Was like, yeah, trade DeMarcus Cousins for him. Just thought Buddy Hield was the next Steph Curry. Well, Buddy Hield, I think, is actually secretly an underrated three-point shooter in league history. He ain't no Steph Curry, right? Randy Dive's had 8+ coaches in his 12 years owning the team. There has been no such thing as stability whatsoever. And so he's a meddling owner. Whatever you want to think about Gail Benson, she's not a meddling owner. Anything like that. If anything, her fault is being too loyal to someone like Mickey Loomis. Look, I'm not on Locked On Saints. I don't think Loomis should be the GM, but he's been there for forever. It's someone she trusts. You're kind of looking at it as a mom and pop kind of organization there where it's oh, this is someone that's been around for forever, so we're not going to let him go, even if it's not in the best interest of the organization, of the franchise, of the Saints, right? Here's the thing, though. That doesn't apply to the Pelicans at all. Mickey Loomis has nothing to do with New Orleans. Or, sorry, not with New Orleans, with the Pelicans at all. It's David Griffin running it. Simple as that. So, if it's Gail Benson's too loyal to David Griffin, look, he's been here since 2018. It's been 6 years, yeah. But that's not nearly the same thing as kind of sticking through the Mickey Loomis tenure that they have gone through right now. At all. So she can make that decision here. And I think it'll be easier for her to make that decision on David Griffin than it would be on someone like Mickey Loomis. And I think they're just going to wait to the offseason to really look at all of that. So Loomis doesn't do anything with the Pelicans. Dennis Lauscha doesn't do much on the basketball side of on-court stuff, right? He is more on the business side, absolutely involved. That price is going up, things like that. That has to do with him. We'll talk about that a separate time because I agree that needs to go down. But he's not the one, Dennis Lauscha is not the one being yeah, build around Zion, build around Ingram, don't trade them or anything like that, right? Ownership also isn't cheap. This is a top 10 payroll this year. The facilities have been regularly upgraded here. I think it's also just hard to get it right, especially in a smart market. It's just tough. It's tough to win a title in the NBA. Look at how few franchises have actually done it. Now, we're in a bit of a different area where there's much more parity, but that's only within the past 4 years that you've really started to see it. 4, 5, 6 years. Before that, it wasn't the case. It was 5 franchises that had more than half the titles. Far more than 3/4 of the titles, something like that. It's just tough to win. It's tough. The Portland Trailblazers' success they had under Damian Lillard, where they were never going to win a title, is very much an outlier, and we would take that. I would take that in a second. I'd take a grit and grind era Grizzlies in a second. But there's a reason you don't see those emulated very often. It's just really, really difficult to do it unless you just luck into the right type of player, like the Bucks, smaller market, even though it's not small, I would say. Smaller market, and then Giannis, who's super easy to build around. Plays defense, plays all the games, is a good person. You don't need to worry about him. It's just not been the case here. It goes back to you play the hand you're dealt, and sometimes it's just a losing hand. And as much as that sucks to think that maybe there was just never a chance, never hope, it starts to feel that way when it comes to all of this. But so this whole show is not me trying to be don't fire Willie Green. I don't think he should be the head coach next year. I'll say that. David Griffin, I think it's a bit of a different story, and it depends on what they want to do in the direction that this franchise wants to go in. And I think they're going to try and be competitive next year. You look at some of the drafting of Trey Murphy, Yves Missi, Herb Jones, finding Jose Alvarado. They've done a lot of good here too. Every front office has misses too, including the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are one of the best positioned teams going forward. Look at Sean Marks in Brooklyn. Tried it around, Kyrie, Kevin Durant, James Harden. Didn't work. Still there. He's going to go through a good rebuild, but they trust him because he at least tried, realized it didn't work, and sometimes that happens. That's process over results. And sometimes you want to look at that. The results can be out of your control. The process is not. I think you could say the process was fine. You could say it's not. I think it's 50-50 when it comes to that sort of thing. So we'll see what they end up doing. Look, I still think they could fire Willie Green this season. I think it's much more likely, not saying this set in stone, but much more likely that it will be in the offseason because of the injuries. That's a big excuse here. You put excuse in quotes on that, right? That's what that is. It's very different than Mike Brown being fired by the Kings, even if there are similarities in terms of the losses, disappointing season. If you go 0-5 on a homestand, that's not a good look, especially with New Orleans being blown out in almost all of those, other than one of them. Yeah, the Denver game was close. Everything else is by double digits at the very least. No, the Memphis loss was 8 points, so still not great. We'll see what they end up doing. But the Sacramento Kings are getting killed for this. And I don't think the franchise wants that. And while I don't think they would be rightfully blasted as much as the Kings were, I think that's worth keeping in mind on why this isn't happening yet. Maybe you can say, just for the PR and the optics, it shouldn't be a reason not to do something. I agree with you, but we'll see. So that's kind of the similarities and the differences. There are a lot of similarities, but I think there are a lot of differences here too. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Went up a little bit longer than I meant to on this show, so that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. A lot more to come this week. We'll recap tonight's game in tomorrow's episode. I want to look at Yves Missi's growth, Trey Murphy's growth. Got 2 really interesting Brandon Ingram trades for you as well, so we got a lot to cover here on Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.